Detective Riley Chen pulled into the gravel driveway of her new home and couldn't help but smile. After months of apartment hunting and dealing with noisy neighbors, she finally had what she'd always dreamed of, a small ranch with 5 acres of land, complete privacy, and enough space to breathe. The property wasn't fancy, but it was perfect for someone who needed to keep a low profile. The house sat back from the road, surrounded by old oak trees and a weathered wooden fence that had clearly seen better days. There was a small barn that housed 2 rescued horses, Midnight and Thunder, who had come with the property. The previous owner, an elderly rancher named Bill, had been forced to sell due to health issues but made sure the horses would be cared for. Riley had specifically chosen this location because it was away from the city, quiet, and most importantly, it gave her the perfect cover for her real job. As an undercover detective specializing in major drug operations, she needed a place where she could meet informants, change her appearance, and operate without suspicious neighbors watching her every move. The ranch was ideal, or so she thought. On her 3rd day of moving in, Riley was unloading boxes from her truck when she noticed someone walking up her driveway. The woman was probably in her mid-50s, wearing a crisp white polo shirt and khaki pants, carrying a clipboard like she was conducting some kind of official business. Her perfectly styled blonde hair didn't move despite the morning breeze, and her smile looked more forced than friendly. "Hello there," the woman called, out, her voice carrying that tone people use when they're trying to sound sweet but aren't fooling anyone. "I'm Linda Patterson, president of the Willowbrook Heights Homeowners Association. I wanted to personally welcome you to our community." Riley set down her box and walked over, extending her hand. "Thanks, I'm Riley. Nice to meet you." Linda shook her hand briefly, her eyes already scanning the property behind Riley's shoulder. "Oh, what a lovely little place you have here. Though I have to say, there are a few things we'll need to discuss about bringing it up to community standards." "Community standards?" Riley asked, confused. She'd done her research before buying the property and was certain it wasn't part of any homeowners association. Linda flipped through several pages on her clipboard, making little clicking sounds with her tongue. "Well, yes. While your property technically predates our HOA by several years, we believe in maintaining consistent standards throughout the entire area. It's about property values, you understand?" Riley felt her detective instincts kick in. Something about Linda's tone and body language set off warning bells. "I appreciate your concern, but I think there might be some confusion. This property isn't part of your HOA. I checked all the legal documents before I bought it." Linda's smile became even more strained. "Oh, honey, legal documents can be so confusing. What matters is community spirit and working together to keep our neighborhood beautiful. Now, I've noticed a few things that we'll need to address." Without waiting for permission, Linda began walking around Riley's property, clipboard in hand, making notes. Riley followed, part curious and part annoyed at the woman's audacity. "This fence, for instance," Linda said, tapping her pen against the weathered wood. "It's really not in keeping with our community aesthetic. We prefer white vinyl fencing, 6 feet high with posts every 8 feet. There's an approved contractor list I can give you." Riley looked at the fence that had been standing for probably 20 years. It was sturdy, functional, and gave the property character. "The fence is fine. It's been here longer than your HOA has existed." Linda made a note on her clipboard. "And these horses," she continued, walking toward the barn where Midnight and Thunder were grazing peacefully. "I'm afraid we have strict rules about livestock. They create odors and attract flies, not to mention the noise factor." "Noise factor?" Riley couldn't help but laugh. "They're horses, not rock concerts, and they were here long before any of your neighbors moved in." "Nevertheless," Linda said, her voice becoming sharper, "we have standards to maintain. Property values in Willowbrook Heights have increased 12% over the past 2 years, and we intend to keep that trend going." Riley was starting to understand what kind of person she was dealing with. Linda was one of those people who got a little bit of power and let it go to their head. The kind who made everyone's life miserable because they enjoyed having control over others. "I understand you want to protect property values," Riley said, trying to keep her voice calm and professional. But like I mentioned, this property isn't part of your HOA. I'm not bound by your rules or regulations. Linda's friendly mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something much less pleasant underneath. We'll see about that. Community standards apply to everyone, whether they want to admit it or not. Over the next few days, Linda made it her personal mission to document every aspect of Riley's property that didn't meet her approval. She showed up at random times, always with her clipboard, taking photos and measurements. She complained about the gravel driveway, saying it created dust that affected her neighbor's air quality. She objected to Riley's mailbox, claiming it wasn't regulation height. She even had issues with the way Riley parked her truck, saying it was an eyesore visible from the road. Riley tried to be patient. She'd dealt with difficult people before in her line of work, but this was different. At work, she could use her authority as a police officer when necessary. Here she had to maintain her cover as a freelance consultant, which meant staying calm and reasonable even when Linda was being completely unreasonable. The situation became more complicated because Riley's job required her to have visitors at odd hours. Informants couldn't exactly schedule appointments during normal business hours, and sometimes she needed to meet with other undercover officers or her handler. To anyone watching, it might look suspicious. Different people coming and going at all hours, sometimes staying just a few minutes before leaving. Linda, of course, noticed immediately. She began keeping a log of Riley's visitors, noting license plate numbers and arrival times. She started making comments about suspicious activity and wondering aloud what kind of business Riley was really running from her property. "I don't mean to pry," Linda said during one of her unwelcome visits, "but you seem to have quite a few visitors for someone who works from home. Are you sure you're not operating some kind of business that requires proper permits?" Riley had to bite her tongue. If Linda only knew that her visitors were other police officers and confidential informants helping to take down major drug dealers, she might have a different attitude. But revealing that information wasn't an option. "I do consulting work," Riley explained for the third time. "Sometimes clients prefer to meet in person rather than over video calls." Linda made another note on her ever-present clipboard. "I see. Well, we have very strict rules about home businesses in residential areas. I'll need to check our bylaws and see what permits might be required." The daily harassment was starting to wear on Riley. She'd come home from long days of dangerous, undercover work, dealing with criminals and drug dealers, only to find Linda waiting in her driveway with a new list of complaints. It was like being followed by the world's most persistent door-to-door salesperson, except instead of selling something, Linda was trying to sell Riley on the idea that she needed to completely change her property to satisfy someone else's vision of perfection. What made it worse was that Linda was recruiting other HOA members to her cause. Riley started noticing people she'd never met before walking slowly past her property, obviously checking it out and taking photos with their phones. Some of them were bold enough to stop and stare, pointing at different aspects of the ranch and shaking their heads disapprovingly. Riley realized this wasn't going to end anytime soon. Linda had made it her personal crusade to bring the ranch up to standards, and she clearly wasn't going to give up easily. What Linda didn't know was that she'd picked the wrong person to mess with. 3 weeks had passed since Linda's first visit, and Riley thought things might finally be settling down. She was wrong. If anything, Linda had become more determined and creative in her approach to making Riley's life difficult. It started with the orange cones. Riley came home from a particularly long undercover operation to find bright orange traffic cones blocking her driveway. Linda was standing nearby, talking to 2 other women Riley didn't recognize, all of them holding clipboards and wearing matching polo shirts with Willowbrook Heights HOA embroidered on them. "Excuse me," Riley called out, getting out of her truck. "Those cones are blocking my driveway." Linda looked up with that fake smile she'd perfected. "Oh, Riley, we're conducting a safety assessment of the neighborhood. Your gravel driveway creates quite a dust hazard when vehicles turn in and out. We're documenting the problem for our monthly safety report." Riley looked at the 3 women, all staring at her like she was some kind of criminal. "My driveway is on my property. You can't block it. Actually, said one of Linda's companions, a thin woman with gray hair pulled back in a tight bun. "We have every right to ensure neighborhood safety. I'm Barbara, the HOA safety coordinator. And I'm Janet, the architectural compliance officer," added the third woman, who looked like she'd stepped out of a country club magazine. "We've received several complaints about the visual impact of your property on our community." Riley felt her blood pressure rising. These women were talking about her like she wasn't even there. "Complaints from who? I've been nothing but polite to everyone I've met." Linda pulled out a folder thick with papers. "We've documented numerous concerns from community members. The gravel driveway, the weathered fencing, the barn that's visible from Maple Street, and of course, the ongoing issues with your livestock." "My horses?" Riley couldn't believe what she was hearing. "They're rescue animals. They've been here for 5 years. Be that as it may," Barbara jumped in, "they create odors and noise that affect our residents' quality of life. Mrs. Henderson from Pine Court says the smell carries to her backyard when she's trying to entertain guests." Riley knew Mrs. Henderson lived at least half a mile away. There was no way she could smell the horses from her house, but apparently logic wasn't part of this conversation. "Look," Riley said, trying to keep her voice calm. "I understand you have concerns, but blocking my driveway isn't legal. I need to get to my house." Linda exchanged glances with her companions. "Of course, dear. We're just finishing up our documentation. But I do hope you'll consider attending our next HOA meeting. We'd love to discuss some solutions that would benefit everyone." Riley moved the cones herself and drove up to her house, watching in her rearview mirror as the 3 women continued their assessment for another 20 minutes, taking photos and making notes. The next morning, Riley discovered that Linda's campaign had escalated to a whole new level. When she went to get her mail, she found a thick envelope from the county health department. Someone had filed a complaint about potential septic violations on her property. Riley called the number on the letter and spoke to a tired-sounding inspector named Dave. "Ma'am, we received a complaint that your septic system might be contaminating groundwater in the area. I'll need to come out and do an inspection." "When was this complaint filed?" Riley asked. "Yesterday afternoon. Anonymous tip through our hotline. Could be nothing, but we have to follow up on every report." Riley knew exactly who had made that call. Dave showed up 2 days later, spent an hour poking around her property, and found absolutely nothing wrong. "Whoever called this in wasted everyone's time," he told Riley. "Your system is fine. Better than fine, actually. Looks like it was recently updated." But Linda wasn't done. Over the next week, Riley received visits from the county noise control officer, someone from animal services, and even a representative from the fire department, all responding to anonymous complaints about her property. The noise control officer was particularly confused. "Ma'am, I've been sitting in my truck for 30 minutes and the loudest thing I've heard is birds chirping. What exactly is supposed to be making noise out here?" Riley pointed toward Linda's house, barely visible through the trees. "I think my neighbor is having some kind of issue with my horses." The officer looked puzzled. "Horses make noise during the day sometimes. That's normal. Unless they're neighing all night long, there's no violation here." Each inspection took time away from Riley's real job. She had to coordinate with her handler to reschedule meetings with informants, and she was missing important briefings about the drug operation she was working on. Her cover required her to be available and flexible, but Linda's harassment was making that nearly impossible. The situation got worse when Linda started spreading rumors around the neighborhood. Riley began noticing how conversations stopped when she walked into the local grocery store. People she'd never met were giving her suspicious looks, and she overheard whispered conversations about that woman with the ranch and all those strange visitors. Linda had clearly been busy. She'd somehow convinced people that Riley was running some kind of illegal business from her property. The irony wasn't lost on Riley. She was working to take down actual criminals, but her neighbors thought she was the suspicious one. One evening, Riley's phone rang. It was her handler, Detective Captain Rodriguez. "Chen, we need to talk. I'm hearing rumors that your cover might be compromised." Riley's heart sank. "What kind of rumors?" "Someone's been asking questions about you around town. Nothing specific. but enough to make people notice. Are you having problems with anyone in your area? Riley couldn't tell her captain that her biggest threat wasn't the dangerous drug dealers she was investigating, but a suburban HOA president with too much time on her hands. I'll handle it, Captain. See that you do. This operation is too important to lose because of neighborhood drama. The next day, Linda showed up at Riley's door with a petition. I wanted to give you a chance to see this before we submit it to the county, she said, holding out a clipboard with at least 20 signatures. Riley read the petition with growing disbelief. It requested that the county investigate ongoing nuisance violations at her property, including excessive traffic from unknown individuals, potential business operations without proper permits, and failure to maintain property in accordance with community standards. This is ridiculous, Riley said. Half of these things aren't even true. Linda shrugged. The signatures speak for themselves. 23 concerned residents can't all be wrong. Riley looked at the names on the petition. Most of them she didn't recognize, but a few belonged to people she'd seen walking past her property, taking photos and making notes. What do you want from me? Riley asked, finally losing her patience. Linda's mask slipped again, showing that cold calculation underneath. I want you to understand that this community has standards. We've worked hard to build something special here, and we won't let one person destroy that because they think rules don't apply to them. I'm not destroying anything. I'm just trying to live peacefully on my own property. Peacefully? Linda laughed, but there was no humor in it. You call having strangers coming and going at all hours peaceful? You call ignoring community concerns peaceful? Riley realized there was no reasoning with Linda. The woman had decided that Riley was the enemy, and nothing was going to change her mind. What made it worse was that Linda was smart about her harassment. She always stayed just within legal boundaries, never quite doing anything that Riley could take to the police without revealing her own identity. As Linda walked away, Riley knew this was far from over. If anything, Linda seemed energized by the conflict, like she was enjoying the battle. Riley had dealt with drug dealers who were less persistent than this HOA president. The worst part was that Linda's campaign was working. Riley's peaceful ranch was becoming exactly the opposite of what she'd hoped for, a place of constant stress and unwanted attention. And with her undercover operation reaching a critical phase, she couldn't afford any more distractions. But Linda wasn't done yet. She had bigger plans, and Riley was about to discover just how far a determined HOA president would go to get her way. Riley had reached her breaking point. After weeks of harassment, false complaints, and constant interference, she made a decision that would change everything. She was going to install a gate at the entrance to her property. The decision came after she discovered something that made her blood boil. For months, people had been using her private gravel road as a shortcut to reach the main highway. Instead of driving the extra quarter-mile around to the proper road, neighbors were cutting through her property like it was a public thoroughfare. Riley first noticed it when she saw tire tracks that didn't match her truck. Then she started finding fast food wrappers and cigarette butts along her driveway. One morning, she even found a coffee cup from the local gas station sitting on her fence post, like someone had used it as a rest stop. This is unbelievable, Riley muttered to herself as she picked up the trash. She decided to sit by her window one evening to see what was really happening. What she saw made her furious. Car after car was turning into her driveway, driving all the way to her house area to turn around, then heading back out toward the highway. Some drivers were even honking their horns if they met another car coming the opposite direction, like they were frustrated by traffic on what they thought was a public road. One particularly bold driver actually stopped and got out to move one of Riley's trash cans that was blocking their path. Riley watched through her window as the stranger casually relocated her property, like they owned the place. That was it. The next morning, Riley called a fencing company and ordered a heavy-duty gate to be installed at the entrance to her property. It wasn't cheap, but she was tired of random people treating her private land like a public park. The gate installation took 2 days. It was a solid metal gate that swung open with a remote control, with a keypad for visitors who had the code. Riley made sure it was clearly marked with private property, no trespassing signs on both sides. The first person to discover the gate was Mrs. Peterson from Oak Street, who had apparently been using Riley's driveway as her regular shortcut to work. Riley watched from her kitchen window as Mrs. Peterson sat in her car for a full 5 minutes, honking her horn like the gate would magically open if she made enough noise. Finally, Mrs. Peterson got out of her car and walked up to the gate, pushing on it and looking around like she was searching for a hidden switch. When that didn't work, she pulled out her phone and made a call. Riley could only imagine who she was calling. 20 minutes later, Linda's car came speeding down the road. She parked behind Mrs. Peterson and marched toward the gate like she was leading a military assault. Riley decided this was a conversation she needed to hear, so she walked out to meet them. "What is the meaning of this?" Linda demanded, pointing at the gate like it was personally offensive to her. "It means this is private property," Riley replied calmly. "People have been using my driveway as a shortcut, and I'm tired of it." Mrs. Peterson stepped forward, looking genuinely confused. "But we've always used this road. It's been a community shortcut for years." "A shortcut through someone else's private property without permission," Riley pointed out. "That's called trespassing." Linda pulled out her phone and started taking pictures of the gate from every angle. "This is completely unacceptable. You're blocking community access to a traditional route that residents have relied on for years." Riley couldn't believe what she was hearing. "Traditional route? It's my driveway, on my land, that I pay taxes on." "There are easement laws," Linda said, though she didn't sound entirely sure about what those laws actually said. "You can't just block access that the community has been using." "Watch me," Riley replied, walking back toward her house. Over the next few days, Riley discovered just how many people had been using her property as their personal highway. Car after car arrived at the gate, with drivers looking confused and angry when they couldn't get through. Some people honked for several minutes, apparently hoping Riley would come running out to open it for them. One morning, Riley found a note, taped to her gate that read, "This is very inconvenient for the neighborhood. Please remove immediately." It wasn't signed, but Riley had a pretty good idea who wrote it. Linda's response was swift and dramatic. She organized what she called an emergency HOA meeting to address the gate crisis. Riley wasn't invited, but she heard about it from her mail carrier, who mentioned that cars had been lined up outside the community center for 2 hours. The next day, Linda showed up at Riley's gate with a whole entourage. There were at least 8 people with her, including Barbara and Janet from before, plus several residents Riley had never seen. They looked like they were ready for war. "Riley Chen," Linda called out through the gate's intercom system. "We need to discuss this situation immediately." Riley walked out to meet them, staying on her side of the gate. "What situation would that be?" "This gate," Linda gestured dramatically, "is causing serious problems for our entire community. People are having to drive an extra 10 minutes to get to work because you've blocked their normal route." "Their normal route through my private property," Riley corrected. Barbara stepped forward with her clipboard. "We've documented the impact this gate is having on traffic patterns throughout the neighborhood. Property values could be affected if residents can't access convenient transportation routes." Riley looked at the group of angry faces staring at her through the gate. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly. You're upset that you can't trespass on my property anymore?" "It's not trespassing when it's been a community tradition," Janet argued. "Some of our residents have been using this route for over 5 years. Using it illegally," Riley pointed out, "without my permission or the permission of the previous owner." Linda pulled out yet another folder of papers. "We've consulted with our HOA attorney, and there may be legal precedent for community access rights when a route has been in use for an extended period." Riley's detective training kicked in. She recognized a bluff when she heard one. "Then take me to court. Until then, the gate stays." That evening, things escalated to a new level. Riley was working in her barn, feeding the horses, when she heard voices near her gate. She looked out to see several people with flashlights, examining the gate mechanism and taking photos. Riley walked over to investigate. "Can I help you with something?" One of the men, someone she'd never seen before, looked up from where he was kneeling by the gatepost. "We're inspecting the installation to make sure it meets county safety codes." "And you are?" "Tom Bradley, HOA compliance officer," he said, standing up and brushing dirt off his knees. "This gate might not meet setback requirements for the road." Riley looked at the gate, which was clearly on her property, well back from the public road. "It's on my land, installed by a licensed contractor with all proper permits." "We'll see about that," said another man Riley didn't recognize. "I'm calling the county tomorrow to make sure all regulations were followed." Riley realized Linda had recruited these people to find any possible legal angle to force her to remove the gate. They were desperately searching for some regulation, some code violation, anything that would give them leverage. The harassment continued for days. Different people showed up at random times claiming to be inspecting various aspects of the gate installation. One woman even brought a measuring tape and tried to determine if the gate was exactly the right distance from the property line. Riley's phone started ringing constantly. People she'd never met were calling to complain about the inconvenience the gate was causing them. Some were polite but persistent. Others were downright rude. "Do you realize you've added 15 minutes to my commute?" one caller demanded. "I've been using that road for 3 years." "Then you've been trespassing for 3 years," Riley replied before hanging up. The situation was affecting Riley's work more than ever. She had to coordinate with her handler to change meeting locations because she couldn't guarantee that informants wouldn't be confronted by angry neighbors at her gate. The constant stress was making it hard to focus on the complex undercover operation she was supposed to be managing. What made it worse was that Linda seemed to be enjoying the conflict. She showed up every few days with new complaints, new theories about why the gate was illegal, and new demands for Riley to remove it. She'd recruited most of the neighborhood to her cause, turning Riley's simple desire for privacy into a community-wide battle. Riley knew this wasn't going to end peacefully. Linda had made the gate her personal crusade, and she clearly wasn't going to give up until she won. But Riley had no idea just how far Linda was willing to go to get her way. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning that started like any other day. Riley had been up late the night before working on her undercover case, coordinating with other detectives about a major drug bust planned for the following week. She'd finally gotten to bed around 3 in the morning and was hoping to sleep in a little. That hope was shattered at 7:30 when she heard someone banging on her gate. Not knocking politely, but actually hitting the metal with what sounded like a stick or tool. Riley rolled out of bed, threw on some clothes, and looked out her window to see Linda standing at the gate with what appeared to be a small sledgehammer. Riley rushed outside, still half asleep and definitely not in the mood for another confrontation. "What are you doing?" Linda looked up from where she'd been hitting the gate's lock mechanism. Her usually perfect hair was disheveled, and there was a wild look in her eyes that Riley had never seen before. "This gate is illegal, and I'm going to prove it." "By vandalizing my property?" Riley asked, walking closer. "By conducting a proper inspection," Linda replied, holding up the sledgehammer like it was a perfectly normal inspection tool. "I think this gate is blocking emergency vehicle access. That would be a serious code violation." Riley looked at the gate, which was plenty wide enough for any emergency vehicle and had been approved by the county when she got her permits. "Linda, you need to stop hitting my gate and leave my property." "I'm not on your property," Linda said, though she was clearly standing on Riley's side of the property line. "I'm conducting a community safety inspection." That's when Riley noticed Linda wasn't alone. Barbara and Janet were standing about 20 feet away, both holding cameras and filming everything. 2 other people Riley didn't recognize were also there, including a man with a measuring tape who was apparently trying to measure the gate's width. "Are you people serious right now?" Riley asked, looking around at what had become a small crowd of HOA members on her property. "Deadly serious," Linda replied. "We have reason to believe this gate violates multiple county codes and community safety standards. We're documenting everything for our legal case." Riley's detective training told her this situation was about to get out of hand. Linda's behavior was becoming increasingly erratic, and having multiple people trespassing on her property while filming could easily escalate into something much worse. All of you need to leave my property right now, Riley said firmly. This is trespassing, and I'm not going to ask nicely again. Linda laughed, but it wasn't a pleasant sound. Oh, please. You can't hide behind property rights when you're violating community standards and blocking emergency access. Emergency access to what? Riley asked. This is my driveway to my house. Emergency vehicles can reach every house in this area without going through my property. That's not the point. Linda shot back, her voice getting louder. The point is that you think you can do whatever you want without considering how it affects other people. Riley realized that Linda wasn't really talking about the gate anymore. This had become personal for her in a way that went beyond HOA rules or community standards. Linda saw Riley as someone who had challenged her authority, and she wasn't going to let that stand. The man with the measuring tape approached the gate's electronic control box. I think this electrical installation might not be up to code either, he announced. We should probably call the county electrical inspector. Riley had had enough. Don't touch that. Everyone needs to leave my property immediately or I'm calling the police. Linda's eyes lit up at that threat. Go ahead and call them. I'd love to have an official response to this whole situation. Riley pulled out her phone, but before she could dial, Linda snatched it right out of her hands. Hey! Riley shouted. Give me my phone back. Not until we finish our inspection, Linda said, holding the phone behind her back like a child who'd stolen a toy. Riley couldn't believe what was happening. A grown woman, the president of a homeowners association, had just grabbed her phone like some kind of playground bully. The situation had crossed from annoying harassment into actual criminal behavior. Linda, give me my phone back right now, Riley said, her voice taking on the authoritative tone she used in her police work. Or what? Linda challenged. You'll call your mysterious friends who come and go at all hours? Maybe it's time we found out what kind of business you're really running here. That comment hit a nerve. Linda's months of surveillance and complaints were threatening to expose Riley's undercover work, which could endanger not just her current case but also the lives of informants and other officers involved in the operation. Riley stepped closer to Linda. Give me my phone. Linda backed away, still holding the phone behind her back. Not until you agree to remove this gate and stop disrupting our community. Barbara and Janet continued filming everything, clearly enjoying the confrontation. The man with the measuring tape had moved on to examining the gate's hinges, apparently looking for any possible code violation. Riley realized she was in an impossible position. She couldn't use her police authority without blowing her cover, but she also couldn't let Linda and her crew continue trespassing and harassing her. The situation was spiraling out of control, and Linda seemed to be feeding off the chaos. Fine, Riley said, pulling out her backup phone from her back pocket. I'll use this one to call the police. Linda's expression changed when she saw the second phone. Why do you have two phones? What kind of person carries two phones? Riley ignored the question and started dialing 911. But before she could complete the call, Linda did something that shocked everyone present, including her own supporters. Linda grabbed the gate's control box and started hitting it with her sledgehammer. Linda, stop, Barbara called out. You're going too far. But Linda was beyond reasoning. She kept hitting the control box, sending sparks flying and completely destroying the electronic mechanism that operated the gate. There, Linda panted, dropping the sledgehammer. Now let's see how you like having your precious gate stuck closed, permanently. Riley stared at the destroyed control box, realizing that Linda had just committed felony vandalism in front of multiple witnesses. The damage would cost hundreds of dollars to repair, and more importantly, Linda had just trapped herself and her supporters on Riley's property, since the gate could no longer be opened electronically. Linda, Riley said quietly, do you realize what you just did? Linda looked around at the damaged control box, then at the faces of her supporters, who were all staring at her with expressions ranging from shock to horror. Even Barbara had stopped filming. I was conducting a safety inspection, Linda stammered, but her voice lacked the confidence it had carried moments before. You just destroyed my property with a weapon while trespassing, Riley said. In front of witnesses, while being filmed. The reality of the situation began to sink in for Linda. Her face went pale as she looked at the sledgehammer in her hands, then at the sparking remains of the gate's control system. "I was just trying to," Linda started, but she couldn't finish the sentence. Janet stepped forward. "Linda, we should probably leave now." But they couldn't leave. The gate was electronically locked, and Linda had just destroyed the only way to open it from the outside. They were all trapped on Riley's property with clear evidence of vandalism and trespassing. Riley looked at her phone and realized she was about to make a call that would change everything. Not just for Linda and her HOA supporters, but for her own carefully maintained cover identity as well. What Linda didn't know was that the 911 call she was about to witness would reveal more than just Riley's patience had finally run out. It was about to expose exactly who Linda had been harassing for the past 2 months and why that was the biggest mistake she could have possibly made. Riley stood there looking at her destroyed gate control system, then at Linda, who was still holding the sledgehammer like she couldn't quite believe what she'd just done. The HOA president's face had gone from angry red to pale white in the span of about 10 seconds. "What's your emergency?" came the voice from Riley's phone. Riley took a deep breath, knowing that what she was about to say would change everything, not just for Linda but for her own carefully protected cover identity as well. "This is Detective Riley Chen, badge number 4782, she said clearly. "I need units to respond to 1247 Oak Ridge Road for vandalism and trespassing in progress." The silence that followed was deafening. Linda's mouth fell open so wide she could have caught flies. Barbara dropped her camera. Janet just stood there blinking like she was trying to process information that didn't make sense. "Did you just say detective?" Linda whispered. The 911 dispatcher responded professionally. "Detective Chen, units are en route. Are you in immediate danger?" "No immediate danger," Riley replied, keeping her eyes on Linda's shocked face. "But I have multiple trespassers on my property who just destroyed my gate system with a sledgehammer. The primary suspect is still holding the weapon." Linda looked down at the sledgehammer in her hands like she'd never seen it before. Her hand started shaking and she dropped it on the ground with a loud clang. "Detective?" Barbara said weakly. "You're a police officer?" "Undercover detective," Riley corrected. "And for the past 2 months, you people have been harassing a law enforcement officer and interfering with an active police investigation." Linda's legs seemed to give out, and she sat down hard on the ground. Oh my God, I had no idea. I thought you were just some woman with an attitude problem." Riley almost laughed at that. "An attitude problem? Linda, you've been trespassing on my property, filing false reports with county agencies, organizing harassment campaigns, and now you've committed felony vandalism. And you think I'm the one with an attitude problem?" The sound of sirens was getting closer. Riley could see the panic spreading through the group of HOA members as they realized the magnitude of their situation. "We didn't know," Janet said desperately. "If we had known you were police, we never would have—" "Would have what?" Riley interrupted. "Never would have harassed me? Never would have trespassed? Never would have tried to destroy my property? So you only respect people's rights when they have a badge?" Officer Kevin Martinez was the first to arrive on scene. Riley knew him from the department, and she could see the confusion on his face as he took in the situation. A group of middle-aged suburban residents trapped on property with a destroyed gate, one of them sitting on the ground looking like she was about to cry. "Detective Chen," Officer Martinez said professionally, though Riley could hear the question in his voice. "What's the situation here?" Riley gestured to the damaged control box. "The woman on the ground, Linda Patterson, used that sledgehammer to destroy my gate's electronic system. She was trespassing on my property along with these other individuals. The whole incident was filmed by her associates." Officer Martinez looked at Barbara, who was still holding her camera. "Ma'am, I'm going to need to see that footage." "It was just a community safety inspection," Linda said weakly from the ground. "We didn't know she was a police officer." "It doesn't matter what my job is," Riley said. "Trespassing and vandalism are crimes regardless of who the victim is." More patrol cars were arriving. Riley's neighbor from across the street had come out to watch the show, along with several other residents who had heard the sirens. Word was spreading quickly through the neighborhood that the woman they'd been calling a troublemaker was actually an undercover cop. Detective Captain Rodriguez arrived about 10 minutes later. Riley's heart sank when she saw him. She knew her. Cover was blown completely now, and depending on how this played out, months of undercover work could be compromised. "Chen," Captain Rodriguez said quietly, "we need to talk." Riley nodded. "Yes, sir. My cover's blown. These people have been harassing me for 2 months, and it escalated to property destruction this morning." Captain Rodriguez looked at the group of HOA members who were now all sitting on the ground looking defeated. "How many people know your real identity?" "Hard to say. They've been spreading rumors about me throughout the neighborhood for weeks. Now that they know I'm police, that information is going to spread fast." Linda finally managed to stand up. "Detective Chen, I am so sorry. If I had known you were law enforcement, I never would have. We were just trying to maintain community standards." Riley felt her temper flare again. "Linda, listen to me very carefully. I don't want your apology because you found out I'm a cop. I want you to understand that what you did was wrong regardless of who I am. You don't get to harass people, trespass on their property, and destroy their belongings just because you think they should follow your rules." Captain Rodriguez was taking notes. "Detective, I need you to file a complete report on this incident. We'll also need to assess how this affects your current assignment." That was exactly what Riley had been dreading. The undercover operation she'd been working on for 6 months was probably over. All because Linda Patterson couldn't mind her own business. Officer Martinez was reading Linda her rights. "Ma'am, you're under arrest for vandalism and trespassing. You have the right to—" "Remain silent." Linda started crying. "Please, I have a job. I have a reputation in this community. Can't we work something out?" "Should have thought about that before you started swinging a sledgehammer," Officer Martinez replied. Barbara and Janet were also being arrested for trespassing, though their charges would probably be less severe since they hadn't actually destroyed anything. The man with the measuring tape turned out to be Linda's brother-in-law, who kept insisting he was just there to help with measurements. As the arrests were happening, neighbors continued to gather. Riley could hear whispered conversations as people realized what had been going on. "She's been an undercover cop this whole time. No wonder she had all those visitors at weird hours. Linda's been harassing a police officer for months." Mrs. Henderson from Pine Court, the woman who had supposedly been complaining about horse smells from half a mile away, approached Riley cautiously. "Detective, I just want you to know that Linda never actually asked me about any horse smells. She just told people I had complained. I love horses." Riley wasn't surprised. "How many of her other complaints were made up?" "Probably most of them," Mrs. Henderson admitted. "Linda has been trying to get people to join her crusade against you for weeks. Most of us told her to leave you alone, but she wouldn't listen." As Linda was being put into the patrol car, she called out to Riley one last time. "I really am sorry. I was just trying to protect our community." Riley walked over to the patrol car. "Linda, let me give you some advice. Real community protection doesn't involve harassing your neighbors. It involves being a good neighbor yourself." The patrol cars drove away, taking Linda and her supporters with them. Riley was left standing in her driveway with Captain Rodriguez in the aftermath of 2 months of harassment. "So," Captain Rodriguez said, "tell me how a suburban HOA president almost compromised a major drug operation." Riley looked at her destroyed gate, then at the crowd of neighbors who were still watching from across the street. Her peaceful ranch had become the center of neighborhood drama. Her cover was blown, and she'd probably have to start over on a new assignment. But at least Linda Patterson would think twice before harassing her next neighbor. The irony wasn't lost on Riley. She'd spent months tracking dangerous criminals without blowing her cover, but it was a HOA president with a clipboard and too much time on her hands who finally exposed her true identity. 3 weeks later, Linda pleaded guilty to vandalism and trespassing. She was sentenced to community service and ordered to pay for Riley's gate repairs. She also resigned from her position as HOA president after the other residents voted her out. Riley's undercover operation was indeed compromised, but her team managed to complete the drug bust successfully with the evidence they'd already gathered. She was reassigned to a new case in a different part of the city. The neighborhood returned to normal, and Riley finally got to enjoy her ranch in peace. Her horses grazed quietly, her gate worked perfectly, and nobody used her driveway as a shortcut anymore. Sometimes the most dangerous people aren't the ones you'd expect.